What's up, people? My name is Shaggy, the opinionated hippie. I started this channel a couple months into COVID to sort of, one, entertain myself when I was working from home, and to two, talk about all things Frank Zappa. Obviously, as you can tell by the title of this video, this is not about Frank Zappa, but Zappa has this concept which he introduced on his album Lumpy Gravy that he sort of, I think, has addressed in interviews and sort of expanded upon, called the Big Note. There's the quote from the Lumpy Gravy album. But essentially, the Big Note pretty much puts forth the idea that everything Frank plays in rehearsals, live in concert, on an album, mistakes, improvs, jams, things that are spoken, whatever, it's all part of the Big Note. There's also this sort of idea of conceptual continuity that Frank has in his music, which is essentially the idea that just because he mentions that mentioning zircon encrusted tweezers, for example, in a bunch of different songs is not just coincidence or not just laziness, it's conceptual continuity. That idea works better with some more like musical motifs and stuff like that, but it's also very much there. Potato-headed Bobby, there's a conceptual continuity that pops up in various stages. So stuff like that. So anyways, using that idea and expanding it, Adrian Belew, who, if you are familiar with either Zappa or King Crimson, was in both. He was in Frank Zappa's band in the fall of '77, the winter of '78 touring bands. As a result, Frank took a lot of those tours and used those live basic tracks as source material for albums. So Adrian Belew's on a lot of albums, most notably Shake Your Booty. And then Belew eventually left Zappa, toured with other artists, including David Bowie, and then eventually hooked up with Robert Fripp in the 80s, joined King Crimson, and was a part of King Crimson for the 6 studio albums. Yeah, those were studio albums, plus others that they did in the 80s, 90s, and aughts. So all I'm going to do here is, so thus, King Crimson is under this umbrella of the Big Note because of Adrian Belew's presence. But I'm just going to briefly, I'm not going to go super in depth like I would with a Zappa album, but this is my ranking of the King Crimson studio albums. If you've only sort of, if you're not into King Crimson and this inspires you to get into them, or you've kind of only know these albums, they are almost as, if not more rewarding to be a fan of than Zappa, though Zappa's catching up in recent years thanks to the Zappa Family Trust. But they've had something called the Collectors Club series since the 90s, in which I think you had to call a number, maybe like a 1-800 number, and then anyways, but I was a part of this club, and they literally just send you discs like every 3 or 4 months of live shows. Some of them sound pretty horrible, but they're nonetheless like pretty rare boots. And as you collected them, the side things all made a picture, so it was neat as the collection expanded over the years, over the decades. That picture started to form. So they've released that. They've had incredible box sets devoted to sort of each era that had a whole bunch of live shows and like remasterings of the albums, and like they put out a whole bunch of live albums and compilations, and almost each album gets like in recent years like an EP version of the album. So there is a whole bunch of material that I'm not going to address in this video. These are just the 13 studio albums. Like Zappa, they would take live material and then use it as a source on like a studio album and give it like a track, like an improv, and then give it like a track Providence, and, you know, put it on an album, you know, mix out as much audience noise as possible. So I say studio in the sense that these are sort of their official discography albums, though some of them are sourced from live material. So anyways, yeah, so that's it. I think that's all I want to talk about. Yeah, so anyways, we're going to start with 13, head to number 1, and here we go. Oh, and none of these are bad. Even number 13, as you're going to find out, I don't think is a bad album. I think what we end up having is we run from just like fantastic, perfect, epic, great prog of all time to forgettable, but not bad, where you listen to it, you enjoy it, but when you're done, you're kind of like, oh, what was that? Though I've seen them live for almost all of these releases, in recent, the 90, the 95 releases, the 2003, that the latter stage releases, I've seen them live, and live they were always incredible. Just sometimes the albums leave me a little wanting. And then one more thing, there are essentially 4 phases of King Crimson. There's the early 69 through 74 phase, which was a bunch of different musicians in the bands throughout that, but sort of Fripp's initial sort of burst of creativity, produced 7 albums. He took a break, came back in the 80s, they did 3 albums with a new lineup, same lineup for all 3 albums, took another break, came back in like 95, 2000, 2003, put 3 albums out over the course of like 8 years. The same core was in that band, though members did come and go. And then he took another break. And then about 8 years ago, he reformed and started touring with a band that has put out a lot of really good live material, has yet to put out a studio album. But this is the new touring band. It's amazing. And it has members from like the 70s, the 80s, from all stages of King Crimson's career. So it's been a incredibly interesting career, and 53 years still in, they're making amazing live music. So anyways, enough rambling, on to number 13. Number 13, The Construction of Light. This came out in 2000. It is the second of the sort of third phase of King Crimson's career. So Adrian Belew is in the band. He's been in the band since the 80s. Robert Fripp obviously is still there. And on percussion, you have Pat Mescalado. And then on bass and all things bassish, as King Crimson is wont to do, like redefine exactly what the bass player does and what they play, you have Trey Gunn. This is the second album. Gunn and Mescalado were there. This is Belew's 5th album. And this is just kind of forgettable. I think in the 80s and 90s and aughts, like the albums are kind of divided between more normal, formal pop and rock songs and instrumentals. And as you get further away from like the first of the 80s albums, Discipline, I think the difference between the quality of the pop rock songs and the quality of the instrumentals, the divide is just a little too much. And it's like, I really, really enjoy the instrumentals, but I'm not enjoying the pop songs too much. Belew's writing style, his lyrics don't really compel me or grab me. And this is the case where there's 3 really good instrumentals, or 2.5 really good instrumentals on here. The Construction of Light, which is about 5 minutes of instrumental. Then there's some lyrics, including the lyric that I'm just a piece of lint on the penis tip of an alien. I think that's the lyric, which I don't like for a lot of reasons. But if you're a piece of lint, right, you are the lint and you're on the penis tip, does that mean the rest of us are all lint? I mean, because that's a lot of lint to have on anybody's penis tip. I'm assuming this is a pretty rather large alien, obviously. But, like, wouldn't Earth be the lint? Or the Milky Way? Or our universe? Like, the fact that you're the lint really confuses me. Because that means all of us are lint on this same tip. But anyways, yeah, penis tip. But anyways, yeah, conceptual continuity. Just the tip. So anyways, yeah, The Construction of Light, the instrumental part I really like, and they've been playing that live, I think, in the recent tours. Really enjoyed that live. Fractured, which is sort of a sequel to Fracture off Starless in the Bible Black, kind of has some of the same, you know, it's kind of the same like riffing and lines that are written. That's enjoyable when I listen to it, but I kind of ultimately can't remember it when it's over. And then Larks, Tongue, and Aspic Part 4, which I think is worthy of being in the part of the Larks, Tongue, and Aspic series. I think it's the weakest of the 4, but I still think it's a pretty good song. Other than that, there's like a handful of songs that have lyrics that I just, Prozac Blues, horrible Adrian Belew vocals. He's doing this weird growl thing, kind of like what ZZ Top did on DeGuello, which I just did not like. Into the Frying Pan, The World's My Oyster Soup Kitchen Floor Wax Museum. The lyrics are trying to be kind of clever, Beatlesque, surrealistic, or commentary on stuff. I don't like them very much. I don't think Belew's delivery here is very good. He's trying to do different things. I just don't think it works. Not a bad album. I enjoy it when I listen to it. But other than recently, for the purposes of this video, I can't say I ever listened to this, though I do really enjoy The Construction of Light live. Live in their current incarnation. Mel Collins, who's on one of these much earlier albums, he plays on the song. And so there's some flute action, there's some saxophone action. And I think mainly my problem with this possibly is the production kind of gives everything this monochromatic feel. So even though there's these really crazy changes in playing going on, everything just seems to be of the same just note for like the entire length of the album. And so by the end of it, I'm just kind of a little bit bored. So yeah, number 13, The Construction of Light. 12, The Power to Believe. This came out in 2003. This is the same lineup that was on The Construction of Light. This album is slightly better because one, I think the instrumentals, there were 3 sort of major instrumentals on here that I think are fantastic. Level 5, which is getting a lot of good play live in recent years. I think one of their best instrumentals. Electric, which is another really good instrumental, has one of my favorite King Crimson moments. There's a moment about 5 minutes into it when they play these 3 notes. It's only 3 notes, but it's like a dun, 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 and then they go off into something else. But the 3 notes sound, if they are not the same 3 notes, as the main riff to Blue Oyster Cult's Vengeance, the Pact, which is like dun 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 that. That main riff, they don't play that riff. They just do the dun dun dun, and then they go off in another direction. But every time I'm listening to this, if I'm ever, and I hate to use this phrase, but I'm gonna do it. If I ever get like lost in the sauce and I'm like just out there enjoying this and they drop in that dun, I'm always like, oh, the vengeance, and I forget where I'm at and I get really excited and then they go off into something else. But it's one of my favorite moments on this entire album. There's also another instrumental, Dangerous Curves, which is kind of in the line of the talking drum or baboom off Thrak, which is kind of this slowly building in both volume and intensity, sort of rollicking, tied up instrumental that leads into something else that kind of builds and builds and builds. Excellent song. Other than that, there's a lot of vocal stuff on here. One of them, Facts of Life, I just don't like. Power to Believe is broken up into a whole bunch of different parts, the title track. Some of it's like a little spoken word thing. There's some nice like sort of ambient type of intros to some of the songs. They're really kind of, even though it's the same 4-member band that was on Construction of Light, they're really diversifying the landscape a little more, making things a little more interesting as far as the journey from point A to, the end of the album. And so I think it's just a little more engaging. And I do think that other than Larks, Tongue, and Aspic 4 from Construction, which might be better than these 3 instrumentals, the 3 main instrumentals on here are just fantastic and are worth having this album just for those. And they also make listening to the album, like Level 5, like the album starts off with like the Power to Believe, like a little spoken word type thing, and then it goes right into Level 5, which is like 5+ minutes long. It's an excellent opener. And so it's a little up and down. It's not as strong as their 70s stuff, but it's still a really good listen. And I definitely think it has a little more variance than something like Construction of Light. So anyways, number 12, The Power. Number 11, Beat from 1982. This is the second album from the 80s incarnation of this band, which was Adrian Belew, Robert Fripp, Tony Levin on bass and all things, Chapman Stick and all things Tony Levin does, and Bill Bruford on drums. They did 3 albums in the 80s. One of them is, I think, a really healthy, well-balanced mix of their weird sort of electronic prog dance, weird, whatever the vibe is they do in the 80s, which is a fantastic vibe. One is a really good mix of that. The other is a stark, first half of this is going to be our pop rock stuff. The second half is going to be really experimental. This is where we have a little more pop rock stuff, not as quite experimental. You only have 2 instrumentals on here, which I think are by far the best 2 things on this album. Other than that, you have a lot of more straightforward, traditional songs. Neil and Jack and Me, Heartbeat, which I think is one of the worst things they've done. Just kind of a straight, I'm waiting for your heartbeat, heartbeat. You could have heard this on like FM radio or MTV. This could have been a hit had it been marketed the right way. I could see like Chris de Burgh or like Richard Marx singing this and having a hit with it. Waiting Man, Neurotica, which is a lot of Adrian Belew. Neurotica is kind of a high, really aggressive, kind of a little more chaotic song. But again, there's a lot of Adrian Belew on here that doesn't always work for me. But the two instrumentals, Sartori and Tangier, which is just, it kind of reminds me of not a Mr. Bungle song, but yeah, it kind of reminds me of a third album Mr. Bungle song. It's got a little or there's another band that Mike Patton was in, and they had a song called Techno Allah in the Desert. Gosh, it wasn't Tomahawk, and it wasn't Mr. Bungle, but whatever band that was that Mike Patton was in, this kind of sounds like an early version of that. It's kind of a weird dance electronic thing with a little sort of a Middle Eastern flavor. And then Requiem, which sounds like an improv. King Crimson's improvs are very like, somebody start playing something and we'll just riff off you and see where this goes. Requiem feels like an improv, but they are really good at taking their improvs and sort of establishing a space and then building that space and intensifying it. And Requiem, which closes the album, is just fantastic. Like one of their best songs. Kind of saves the album. A lot of this stuff works good live. Waiting Man was used as a live song in the 80s, and I think it was a really good, slowly building song, and it worked well. But on the album, it's just kind of a lot of just kind of, I'm not into the pop stuff. I'm not into Adrian Belew songwriting as much as I'm into Fripp sort of writing weird musical passages. And there are songs on here like The Howler, which is just completely forgettable. There's a number of things on here that are completely forgettable, but those two instrumental passages are so good that they kind of elevate this to number 11, beat 11. Number 10, Thrak. This came out in 1995, and this is their only double trio album, which was, you have the same band that was there in the 80s, so you still have Belew, who's always going to be there for the rest of their studio, through the studio careers. He's not in the band now live, but he's there through Power to Believe. You have Tony Levin and Bill Bruford are still there, but now Pat Mescalado and Trey Gunn are also still there. So you have a double trio, and now you have guitar, drums, bass, guitar, drums, bass. Live, the way they set this up, I think it was like drummer, bass player, and the two guitarists were in the middle. It's a really interesting live setup. That was really neat. But this album is also kind of like beat in that it balances out the instrumentals and the songs, but it does so in a much better way. The instrumentals are just excellent. They're definitely just there's a 90s sound to this album, but the instrumentals are just really good riffs and, building, kind of like Red. I think Red, the song Red off Red, is kind of the template for a lot of these instrumentals, it seems like. Thrak is a much more distinct, aggressive version of this. Vroom Vroom also kind of reminds me of Red, I mean. But you have 3, 4, 5 really powerful instrumentals that kind of bookend and middle sandwich the album. Vroom, Vroom Vroom, the Vroom Vroom Coda, plus you have a Ba-Boom into Thrak. Bunch of weird names. And then you have a bunch of songs, more like typical Adrian Belew type songs, but the music in the songs, almost every song either has there's a song called Dinosaur, which I don't really care for as the song, but there's a really nice instrumental breakdown section at the end. People has kind of a really nice jam at the end. Sex, Sleep, Eat, Dream. Another song I just don't like, has a really aggressive guitar playing in it that kind of entertains me. So this is an album that has its ups and downs and has sort of its peaks and valleys, but the peaks are the opening and closing tracks. So you're compelled to listen, and when you're done, primacy and immediacy. Like the first reaction and the last reaction are strong. It's just that middle stuff that you kind of have to wade through, for me, some of the weaker tracks. But then right in the middle, you have that Ba-Boom Thrak, which is phenomenal. I am going to review all the non-studio albums later, but one of my favorite releases that they put out in relationship after they toured Thrak is the song Thrak itself is like a 30-second, maybe it's a minute long, written part, and then they would improvise in the middle. And their improvisations are not like solos or jams or anything like the Dead would do. Maybe the Dead, if you get to something like a really extreme Dark Star playing in the band. But they're really these fractured type jams that kind of sound like Frank Zappa's more abstract synclavier pieces. A lot of playing with manipulating sounds and using electronics, and the drums don't sound like drums, and sometimes the guitars sound like strings, and the bass, they're manipulating sounds, but they're playing it live anyways and reacting to each other in the moment. They put out a fantastic album called Thrak Attack, which is Thrak, the song, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the improvs in the middle, just kind of going from one into the other, and then they end again with Thrak at the end. And so it's like, I think it's like over an hour long, but it's just absolutely incredible. I don't know if it's still available or if it's out there, but it is a great album of just this era doing their really, really weird instrumental stuff, their weird jams that they would have in like each show. So if you like this album and you like sort of the sound of this, I recommend trying to find Thrak Attack. It's a really good release. All right, so number 10. Number 9, Three of a Perfect Pair. This came out in 1984. This is the final album of the 80 foursome of Bruford, Levin, Adrian Belew, and Robert Fripp. This is the first half of the album, though it's just the first 4 songs on side A, being more pop, straightforward songs. King Crimson's version of pop, straightforward songs. 4 songs I did not like for a long time. They have grown on me immensely over the years. Still think one of them, Man with an Open Heart, is pretty bad. Model Man has its moments. Sleepless has way too much slap bass. There's a lot of slap bass in it, and I'm not sure it ages particularly well. The title track I really, really love. But then the second half of the album, despite one other than one song, which is a Captain Beefheart guitar frenzy type chaos pop song, it's all instrumental stuff. Most of it sounds like it was improvised either in the studio or taken out of live context. I think it was all studio stuff. And the titles to the tracks perfectly describe the tracks. So the end of side A ends with an instrumental, which when I listen to it on CD, I almost imagine that it's the 4 songs on side A, and then this is the beginning of side B, because this kind of sounds like a whole different, we're going into a different phase of the album now. I don't know if it works as well closing it because it bleeds into side A, but if you have the vinyl, it's the end of side A. It's a song called Nuages, That Which Passes, Passes Like Clouds. And that is exactly what the song sounds like. That title. That which passes, passes like clouds. Yeah. It's that kind of atmospheric, interesting, engaging, somewhat abstract improv to close out side A. Side B opens with Industry, an instrumental that sounds like industry. Then there's a song called Dig Me. And Dig Me is this weird, funky Captain Beefheart, jangly guitar, weird little pop chaos number. There's a song called No Warning, which sounds like music that would serve as a soundtrack to something that happened after there should have been a warning. The fact that there was no warning cannot be good. This is like low tone, forbidding, ominous type music. And then the album closes out with Larks, Tongue, and Aspect, Part 3, fully worthy of the title, fully worthy of being a part of the Larks Tongue tradition. Excellent, excellent, excellent instrumental to end this album. Yeah, if they had abandoned the pop songs and maybe come up with 3 or 4 more instrumentals, this would jump way up there. It's still a really good album, and I really, really enjoy listening to this. But those first 4 songs, they've grown on me, but I can't say that I really prefer them to other stuff, though I do like the title track a lot. But yeah, number 9. Number 8, Discipline. We're back in the 80s now. This is the first album in the Adrian Belew, Bill Bruford, Tony Levin period of Robert Fripp's King Crimson. This is one of those albums that probably has dropped some over the years just because I kind of over-listened to it a lot in the 80s. This is sort of the perfect mesh of Belew's songwriting, his particular vocal, things that he does, talking, interesting voices, not characters, he's not acting, but he messes around with his voice a lot. Really crazy instrumental stuff, some amazing jams. In Discipline, one of their all-time great live numbers, gives everybody a chance to shine. Elephant Talk, some of Belew's clever lyrics that aren't too clever. They still work for me. They're kind of fun. Essentially, he just goes through a bunch of basically he has a thesaurus, and he does a bunch of A words that about talking, and then B words, and then C words, and then D words. And now we're on the letter D, and then some E words. He makes some elephant noises with his guitar, frame by frame, as you're very sort of what I think is typical at this stage. King Crimson, like do 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 do, like where Belew and like Fripp's guitar lines are just kind of weaving around each other and like moving forward in this weird snake-like fashion. Mate Kudas, I don't know how to say that. I can imagine Belew singing it. Nice little ballad. Thela Hunginjit, just a fire burner of a song. Excellent. My only complaint about this album is the end of side B has The Sheltering Sky, which is a very slow sort of atmospheric number, and Discipline, which is like another instrumental. I think this album would have been served better had like Sheltering Sky maybe been on side A, and maybe Discipline went back to back, where you went Thela Hunginjit, Discipline, and then you close the album with Discipline. I know it doesn't look as well to have the the way the sides are titled, but side B just kind of drags a little for me, and so that kind of has hurt it in this ranking. And I've listened to this way too much and just kind of don't really find anything new in it anymore. Though I will say Indiscipline and Thela Hunginjit are just two absolute hit it out of the ballpark numbers that I really enjoy live, and just have some great rhythms and some great grooves. So yeah, Discipline, number 8, which if you're paying attention, or if you know anything about King Crimson, you've realized that the bottom 6 albums are all the ones done after the 70s. All the ones that have Adrian Belew, to be specific. So I could just stop here because that's where the Frank Zappa connection ends. But we're to continue on to 7 Islands. This came out, when did this come out? 71. I don't even know who's on this album. But so this was their 4th album. Fripp is on it. Mel Collins is on all kinds of flutes and saxophones. Mel Collins is in the current live incarnation of the band. Boz is on, Boz Burrell, I think was his name, is on bass guitar and lead vocals. Your typical King Crimson type lead vocalist. Ian Wallace is on drums, the ridiculously talented Ian Wallace. And then Seinfeld is still writing the words. Plus you got a whole bunch of other guest musicians and Fripp. But this has my least favorite side of King Crimson music on it, side B, which is Prelude, Song of the Gulls, and Islands, 2 songs that just utterly bore me. And then possibly one of my favorite sides of music, side A, which is a very low-key, slow-burning, somewhat jazzy sax solos, a great guitar solo, some very different texture type stuff. You have this Formentera Lady song, which segues into Sailor's Tale, which has a nice sort of jam in it. The Letters, which is one of those like volume, we're going to go low and contrast it with a lot of big energy and then drop back down. And then Ladies of the Road, which is a possible Frank Zappa connection, Road Ladies, another song about ladies of the road, groupies. Frank did it in 70, King Crimson's doing it in 71. Everything about this is great. The vocal performance, everything about Ladies of the Road. Ladies of the Road! Excellent, excellent song. Side A on this album, I think is one of their best. One of their most understated, chill, very atmospheric vibe. Kick back on the couch and just chill out to. Side B, I can do without. But side A is so good that it's all the way at number 7. And also, everything in the 80s, 90s, and the aughts, King Crimson embraced electronics, I think, in the best way possible. You know, they used a lot of effects on their instruments. You know, their improvs, guitars are sounding like strings, the bass is sounding like percussion. They're doing crazy things. They're embracing electronic music in the best way possible. I still think when they're using sort of natural, you know, keyboards, yes, they're using a lot of Mellotron. They're using a lot of like washes of great keyboard sounds. I prefer those sort of acoustic, analog, natural sounds over the electronic sound that they have later on. So that alone, that difference, compels this album, or propels this album up to number 7. But don't like side B. Side A could possibly be perfect. And my favorite of all the box sets that they've released, I've been fortunate enough to be able to get most of them. The Sailor's Tale box set, which has a whole bunch of live shows from, I think, this tour in particular, and features a lot of songs from the 3 previous albums. in the Wake of Poseidon, Lizard, and this. Oh, amazing collection of live shows. Such an amazing box. Don't think it's available anymore, but if you run across it somewhere and it's relatively cheap, I mean, there's like 20 discs, so it's not going to be cheap. And you can't afford that's my favorite of them, and I do recommend it. But that's a deep dive for another day. But yeah, number 7. Number 6, In the Court of the Crimson King. And yes, this might be the one hot take on this list, but not going to deny its place in history, its importance as one of the greatest prog albums of all time, if not the first prog album of all time. I'm not going to deny the absolute awesomeness of 21st Century Schizoid Man. I'm not going to deny that I think Epitaph is one of their best sort of mellotron building epic songs. I'm not going to deny that In the Court of the Crimson King, the song itself, The Court of the Crimson King, I don't think it's in on the title, and the song is a fantastic song. But I don't ever listen to this album anymore just because I've heard 21st Century Schizoid Man too many times. My favorite part about it is Epitaph, but they've been playing that live in recent years, and those have been on live releases, so I've been enjoying it there. But there are 2 songs on here. I Talk to the Wind, which is a prog, fluty, acoustic, sort of that kind of number, and Moonchild, which is like a slow ballady type thing that leads off into a way too long and not that interesting atmospheric improv section. I don't really care for either one of those songs. And being that the way the album is laid out, amazing first song, 21st Century Schizoid Man. I Talk to the Wind, which I don't care for. Epitaph, which I can now hear live elsewhere. Moonchild, which is way too long. And then In the Court of the Crimson King. Court of the Crimson King. It's not an album I go to, but I couldn't rank it any lower than this just because I have to give it its due props as being an amazing album. And it's one of those things where like 21st Century Schizoid Man is sort of the Willie the Pimp of King Crimson. And like this album, I think, is like the Hot Rats of King Crimson, in that like it's almost ubiquitous. Like, yeah, it's a great album. It's one of the best ever, blah, blah, blah. But I don't ever listen to it. But then when I go back and listen to it, certain things, namely 21st Century Schizoid Man, attack me like, oh yeah, this is ridiculously good. I cannot, like, don't ever like undersell how phenomenal that opening track is, and Epitaph and the title track. But I don't ever want to listen to it anymore because it is something that I've probably heard too much, I would think, in my lifetime. But anyways, excellent album nonetheless. And there are also a number of box sets. I think there's 2 box sets that chronicle a bunch of live shows from right around this era. That are pretty interesting. The sound isn't all that great on them, but there's some pretty interesting listens if you really do like this album. But yeah, number 6, their debut album from 1969, In the Court of the Crimson. Number 5, In the Wake of Poseidon. This is their second album, came out in 1970. This is sort of the band had kind of broken up from my understanding while recording this. So you have 2 different vocalists, Greg Lake from the original album and the original band, he's on here. But then I think Gordon Haskell sits in on a song, no idea. Ian McDonald, the sort of jack of all trades who was playing sax and flute and mellotron and harpsichord and a bunch of stuff, he is gone. But Keith Tippett's now playing piano. Again, Fripp has taken over on mellotron. Michael Giles is still on drums. Peter Giles is playing bass, and Mel Collins, I mentioned Mel Collins, he's now part of the band. So from my understanding it was sort of like wasn't a single recording session with the band, but maybe multiple recording sessions. So this has a little bit of nice variety over the course of the songs. I think you can accuse it of trying to mimic the success and pattern of the original. The first real song, Pictures of a City, piece of beginning, a little quiet, way too quiet opener, which is like 50 seconds long, kind of goes into Pictures of a City. Pictures of a City is like a much jazzier, still heavy, still riffy, still jammy, but a lightly jazzier, a little more ba-da-da-da, like swing version of 21st Century Schizoid Man. Cadence and Cascade, it's kind of like this version's of I Talk to the Wind. In the Wake of Poseidon is a much lesser version of The Court of the Crimson King. But side 2 sounds nothing like anything. Side 2 has Piece of Theme. I think Piece of Theme, I don't know where that falls. I think it opens side 2. Or does. I haven't listened to the vinyl on this in a long time. I just have the CD. But there's a song called Cat Food, which is really jazzy, has some like breakdown piano runs and stuff like that, where, kind of sounds like you're stumbling, falling apart, craziness type stuff. And it's got this really like cat food again, boom, 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 boom. Really just funky and jazzy and just really amazing vibe. And the fact that it's called cat food is just awesome. And then one of my all-time favorite King Crimson tracks, The Devil's Triangle, which is kind of based on their own live versions of Mars, which they would do live on that 69 tour, which you can hear a lot of on a bunch of different box sets, because they played that for a number of years. So it's just that very just almost like slowly building, and it's like three distinct phases where it just kind of builds, just this quiet, like almost ominous, like slowly thumping, throbbing sort of beat, and then it kind of gets crazy, and then the beat amplifies and everything intensifies, and then it seems like the song ends, and then you have a bunch of like tape manipulation, and then it just kind of erupts into this fantastic ending. Just your absolutely perfect, like the last section of this is broken into 3 sections, and the last section is Garden of Worm, which clearly kind of tells you what it's like. But it's just one of those songs that just builds so nicely in its intensity. It's an instrumental, heavy use of mellotron, but just fantastic opener that kind of sounds like nothing else in their catalog, as far as like it's sort of a much rawer, intenser version of something like, but in the same vein of the things like Talking Drum or Baboom or Dangerous Curves, which kind of just build in intensity, the same idea, but they're just adding little, just tweaking a little bit every time and making it a little better, but just a fantastic ending to this album. And I think this is better than anything on the first album, other than say 21st Century Schizoid Man. And because I haven't listened to this as much as the first one, and because the only song I really don't like is Cadence and Cascade, I enjoy this album more than I enjoy the debut at this point in time. So yeah, number 5 in the Wake of Poseidon. Number 4, Starless in the Bible Black. This is the second album in the greatest incarnation of King Crimson's lineup trilogy. The 3 albums, the group that had Robert Fripp on guitar, John Wetton on bass and vocals, who I absolutely love. He's a very, very distinct vocal style, low and very masculine. And then a bass style that you might not like, but if you do, it is amazing. And then Bill Bruford on drums and percussives, as it says in the album. And then David Cross on violin and assorted keyboards. This is a lot of live material. They sourced a lot of sort of their live improv stuff for this album, which is fantastic. I absolutely love that kind of stuff. There's the opening song, The Great Deceiver, is kind of in the line of 21st Century Schizoid Man, Pictures of a City, this, and there would be another one which they would perform live called Dr. Diamond, which is that very sort of very heavy, fast riff, and then you slow down and do something else, and then you go back into that fast riff, kind of that template. This is, I think, Dr. Diamond, which they never released officially on a studio album, but you can get it live. The weakest of the 4 by far. This is the 3rd in the tier. One of the worst lyrics ever, right off the bat. Right off the bat, you get the worst lyric they've ever done, over with. It's an okay song. It's not great, but it's fun. It's a good listen. But then Lament is fantastic. It's all these different changes where like almost like every 8 bars, you're doing 16 bars, you're going in a completely different direction. Kind of reminds me of like their version of Florentine Pogan. Just without an amazing guitar solo at the end. We'll Let You Know, fantastic piece of improv that they've pulled out and just released as its own track. The Night Watch. The Night Watch is about Rembrandt's The Night Watch. That's the sort of the street name for the painting. The full name for the painting is really long. But the second time I went to Amsterdam, the first time I went to Amsterdam, we visited the Rijksmuseum. And I saw the Night Watch. I did not know it was there. But as I'm standing there looking at this painting and reading about it, I'm like, oh, this is the song. This is the painting that inspired the King Crimson song. So when I went back the next time to Amsterdam, we visited a cafe. I think we hit the Grasshopper. I don't know if it's still around. And then we walked quite a bit to the Rijksmuseum. And I had specifically brought a mixtape of Starless in the Bible Black. And so we took turns standing. I don't think you were able to sit in that room. My memories collect is right. This is like 20 plus years ago. It's in its own room. The thing is huge. And we just stood there and just listened to the Night Watch song as we looked at the painting that inspired it. Just absolutely amazing, amazing experience. This will for always be one of my favorite songs. And then an instrumental called Trio, which is an instrumental. I want to say they recorded it in the studio, and Bruford at one point was going to step in. Like, he's at the drum kit the entire time, which is why he gets I want to say he gets a writing credit on this, though there are 0 drums, because he never felt it was the right moment to come in and play. So his decision not to play, Fripp was like, yeah, we're giving you a writing credit because you made the right choice. Brilliant. And then the second side of this album is another instrumental that they sort of overdubbed lyrics on. Another instrumental, like improv instrumental, the Mincer, Starless in the Bible Black, the title track, and improv instrumental. And then Fracture, one of their great epic prog, incredibly complicated, impossible to play songs that has kind of 3 distinct parts. There's like, the first ridiculously hard part, and then you shift into a second ridiculously hard part, and then the third part is sort of those 2 worlds mixed and become their own third ridiculously hard part. Fantastic, fantastic song. Like one of their truly best to close out the album. But yeah, really, really strong listen. Like, I would say that these top 4 are, like, for me, extra top tier, best of the best as far as King Crimson goes for Stardust in the Bible. Number 3, and as I found out a little while ago, talking to somebody else, this might be another hot take. I don't think so. Lizard. King Crimson's Lizard, their 3rd album, another 1970 release. This was another one where I don't think there really was a band, and that it was just a bunch of like hired musicians. Mel Collins is there. Gordon Haskell's on bass and vocals. Andy McCulloch is on drums. This was the only album I think he was drummer on. I think afterwards he said he didn't enjoy it. He was confused. He didn't know what was going on. Whatever. It wasn't his type of music. He's friggin' ridiculous on this album. The drums on this album are friggin' amazing. Like, Andy, you did a great job wherever you are. But this is King Crimson's, I always think of it as their answer to the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's. In that it's definitely like a pop psych album, only it's King Crimson's version of pop psych. It is probably their best headphone album. Like, the acoustic guitar playing on the title track. There are so many, the like sort of vocal manipulation and tape manipulation on Happy Family. It's just, this is their like headphone, psychedelic, trippy, Beatles. Like, Happy Family is apparently even about the Beatles. So this is very much, I think, inspired by a certain type of band and a certain type of music. And it's like Robert Fripp's version of that. And I think this is like one of the best things they've ever done. Circus is just this all over the map prog pop psych song that sounds like a circus. Indoor Games kind of comes out of Circus and brings a different vibe. Happy Family is so much tape manipulation and manipulation of vocals. It is like a bad good trip or a good bad trip, but it's trippy. Trippy is the word to describe that. The only kind of letdown is Lady of the Dancing Water, but it kind of works as sort of a nice hot cup of tea after the first 3 songs on side A. And then side B is one song broken up into 4 different parts, Lizard. It features John Anderson on vocals. This is 70, so Yes has not hit it big yet. Anderson, who knows? Had Yes not hit it big, Anderson could have been in King Crimson longer. It's got a really great chorus that Anderson sings that it took me a long time to like come around to, because I think Anderson's voice works well in Yes, when Yes is doing stuff like Heart of the Sunrise or Close to the Edge, and they're really pushing the envelope musically. I don't like Anderson's voice when they're doing things like Wondrous Story or doing like the lighter side stuff. He's just a little too falsetto for me, but I really like his performance on the first part of this. I love the main chorus that they have. so there's like a song that's about 4.5 minutes long. Then there's a really lengthy jazzy section that starts off with this just really straight and simple sort of saxophone melody line. And then you get a whole bunch of other horns sort of layered in. I think Mel Collins is the only player on this. So obviously it's studio stuff, him layering in. But that goes on for like another 7 minutes. Just absolutely fantastic sort of like jazzy, chaotic, but not too purposefully chaotic type music. Then there's another sort of vocal section that kind of slows the song down. And then the ending is sort of back to your like Mellotron, just drenched, prog, aggressive, kind of that King Crimson, Dinosaur, Lumberson type, like psych prog rock sound that they're so good at. And then after that ends, you have something called Big Top, which is a callback to the opening track Circus. But the journey on this album, from the pop psych chaos of Circus to the absolute epic awesomeness of the 23-minute, each of these is broken up into their own times, like 22+ minute Lizard, just this journey is great. I will say this about King Crimson. The thing I like so much about the original 7 albums, and I would say possibly the 3 that are in the 80s, is they feel like albums. Like you almost feel like if you started off, you're compelled to listen to the end, because every track A, usually the number 1 track doesn't sound like number 2, and number 2 doesn't sound like 3, and 3 doesn't sound like 4. It really seems like, yes, this album is like the sort of pop psych version of them, but the songs don't sound anything like each other, I think, in like instrumentation or tone or style. And Fripp does an amazing job from track to track to track of just like diversifying the landscape, and just makes for really good album listening experiences. But yeah, number 3. Number 2, Red. This was the trio lineup, though there were some guests on this album playing saxophone primarily. This is essentially the Robert Fripp on guitar, Bill Bruford on drums, John Wetton on bass and vocals lineup, with some added like little saxophone on a couple songs. 5 songs on this album. Red, one of their all-time great instrumentals. Fallen Angel, sort of a straightforward, somewhat typical song with some really good sort of instrumental breakdowns. One More Red Nightmare, which they've started to play recently. They've brought that back, and they're now playing that live in this current, going back to like 2015. It's on a lot of their more recent live albums. Excellent, excellent song. Great percussion by Bill Bruford. This is another, the vocals are kind of like whatever on these, but the music serves the vocals well. And John Wetton has such a unique, just 70s prog voice. Just, oh, it's so perfect. And his bass playing is so just in your face there, like loud and proud and boom. But side A, just those 3 perfect songs. Side B, Providence, a live improv from Providence, incredible live improv. And then their best song, I would say, and possibly a contender for one of the best prog rock songs ever, Starless. The words Starless and Bible Black are in this, but since they used that to title the other album, apparently this song, the part of the song with vocals that Wetton wrote, was given to Fripp for the previous album, and Fripp didn't like it, but then later on they coupled it with the sort of instrumental ending, and it was like, whoa, we got something here. And they do. It's like an 11+ minute song. Starts off with some really good kind of a slow ballady with some really good, beautiful Fripp, very terse type playing that he does, melody lines, some Wetton vocals with some great bass playing, and then it just goes into this instrumental breakdown that starts off with like Fripp just doing this just like 3 notes or 2 notes that he's like just playing these 2 ringing notes over and over and over and over, and then he kind of plays around with those, and the music starts to build and build and build until it erupts into like this crazy saxophone solo, and then they bring in like the melody from the beginning and they mix it with the thing at the end, and then right when you think it's gonna like die down, it builds back up again to this absolutely amazing climax. There were fantastic live versions of this all throughout. The Great Deceiver box set, which they've re-released, has fantastic live versions of this. The USA re-release of a live album has a great version of this. A couple of their more recent live albums, Live in Toronto, I think maybe Live in Chicago, I'm not sure if Live in Toronto does. Live in Chicago has a really good live version of this. When I saw them live back in October, they ended with this. Just in absolutely, I think, one of the best prog rock songs ever. And this album is just a hard hitting from start to finish, just prog, pseudo metal, not new metal. No, that would be a horrible thing. But not proto metal, but kind of leaning towards metal, but definitely a little maybe hard rock, but just King Crimson at its King Crimson almost best, because number one is, we're not going to stop the video, we're going to number one. We know what that is. It's Larks, Tongue, and Aspic. The best from start to finish journey of any King Crimson album, bar none. Every song is completely different, sounds nothing like the others. They all complement each other perfectly. The title track, part one, opens. It's like a 12-minute thing that starts off with one of those really slow builds where you're like, man, my volume's all messed up. I have no idea how loud this is going to be, like 2 minutes into it. Starts off with sort of like atmospheric percussion, that sort of like purposeful percussion that leads into atmospheric percussion, that leads into some amazing like violins, some urgency. Then you get the main theme, and then you get all these weird versions with like breakdowns and guitar solos, and then it all breaks down and goes into like a violin solo. Then there's like sort of like an epic, like swelling ending. Amazing opening track. This is the band that has, this is Wetton's first album, Bruford's first album, Fripp's there, David Cross is there, and then there's like a multi-percussionist named Jamie Moore in the band. After that, you get a really nice little ballad, Book of Saturday, just some beautiful guitar playing. Then you get Exiles, one of your big epic mellotron-drenched, like just sort of ballads with Wetton just singing his butt off. You get Easy Money, which is just a nasty stomper of a rock song. Man, especially the studio version with that weird percussions, like it's like this sweat, like they're stepping in like puddles or something. This weird like wet stomping percussive sound. This is one of those songs that live, once they would finish the first two vocals, there's kind of a free form, kind of a guitar solo section. It's weird to call anything Fripp does a guitar solo, but a weird section in the middle that would sometimes just lead into a really lengthy instrumental section. Sometimes they'd actually wrap it up and finish the song. So a really interesting song live. You get that, and then you get Talking Drum, which is this really slow building in both volume and intensity, just like just this riding bass with a Bill Bruford, I'm assuming, is playing a talking drum at some point, you know, the one where you squeeze like that, and then it builds to this like weasel screaming sound. The sound of weasels ripping someone's flesh culminates the song, and then they go right into Larks, Tongue, and Aspic 2, arguably the second best song they ever wrote. Just this ridiculously hard riff that is just metal, prog, rock, hard rock, everything you like about a guitar at its absolute best. One of the best instrumentals this band, the best instrumental this band has ever written, to end an absolutely perfect album from start to finish. I will say that when I was in college, one of my closest friends, when we were a junior, I think, or a couple years in, he never owned a stereo or anything, but we went to a swap meet and he found like a little boom box for like $10. He bought it. We went down to Amoeba Records there in Berkeley, which had just opened, the first one, if I'm not mistaken. And he bought Talking Heads, Speaking in Tongues, and then he bought this on cassette. He also bought a Have a Nice Day, the one that had Superman on it, the Go Flat, that one, the boxing one, the Ali one. But yeah, so he had 3 cassettes. So we listened to this album over and over and over and over and over again while we played like cards and dominoes and stuff like that. So that might be one of the reasons why I love it. But I also think it's number one because it's their best album. So yeah, that's a lot. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking around if you've made it this far. Let me know what you think the best King Crimson albums are and what you think the best King Crimson albums aren't, where I'm wrong, where I'm right. And then I am going to tackle the live albums and other stuff because they have a lot of good stuff. And if you check out something because of this video and you like it, look up their catalog, because there's probably either an EP related to this album or a live thing related to this album. There's some more out there, and they are worth checking out because this band is fantastic. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. I got more stuff coming always. And yeah, thanks, people. All that stuff. Thanks for watching. Peace and take care.